A retired aerospace engineer has given governments the exact coordinates where MH370 sits on the ocean floor. He has mathematical proof backed by 7 years of analysis. He has debris drift models that match perfectly. He has independent verification from scientists around the world. And for 3 years, every government with the power to authorize a search has refused to look. The Disappearance, you already know the basics. March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines, Flight 370, 239 people. A routine red-eye from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing that became the greatest aviation mystery in history. 40 minutes after takeoff, Captain Zaharia Ahmad Shah radioed his last words. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Then someone in that cockpit disabled the transponder, turned the aircraft around, and flew it back across Malaysia before vanishing south into the Indian Ocean. The search that followed was unprecedented. Over 120,000 square kilometers of ocean, floor scanned, hundreds of millions of dollars spent. The most sophisticated underwater technology in the world deployed for years. Ships from dozens of nations, submarines with sonar systems that could detect a suitcase on the seabed. They found nothing. No wreckage, no black boxes, no answers. Just empty ocean and increasingly desperate theories. In 2017, officials suspended the search. They told 239 families their loved ones had simply vanished into the void. They said the plane was somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, but they couldn't say where. Case essentially closed. Another unsolved mystery. Another tragedy without closure. For most of the world, that was where the story ended. An aviation disaster that would join the long list of things we'd never understand. But in a cramped apartment in Frankfurt, Germany, a 72-year-old retired engineer was just getting started. If you want to see how one man proved them all wrong, smash that subscribe button. Because what he found next changes everything. The obsession. Richard Godfrey's home office looks exactly like you'd expect from a man who spent 7 years hunting a ghost. Multiple monitors crowd a small desk, each displaying spreadsheets dense with numbers and coordinates. Stacks of printed technical papers and calculations cover every flat surface. Maps of the Indian Ocean, marked with hand-drawn flight paths and annotated in red ink, cover the walls. Coffee cups sit forgotten among piles of data printouts. This is where Godfrey spent 7 to 8 hours every single day for nearly a decade. Alone, unpaid, obsessing over data points most people had never heard of. His credentials weren't in question. Godfrey spent 42 years on cutting-edge aerospace technology. He earned degrees from the University of Salford and the European Business School INSEAD. He designed autopilots and automatic landing systems for military aircraft, including the F-16 and the Pannovia Tornado. He was lead engineer integrating the European Space Agency's Space Lab with the NASA Space Shuttle. He'd literally helped build the systems that guide aircraft through the sky. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the agency that led the official search, called Godfrey a credible expert on the subject of MH370. These weren't just words. When he published analysis, government agencies reviewed it. When he identified search coordinates, officials at Geoscience Australia requested data reviews. But nobody invited him to join the official investigation, so he started his own. The official search relied on satellite pings from the aircraft's communication system. Solid data, but maddeningly imprecise. It narrowed the crash zone to thousands of square kilometers. Finding wreckage in that area was like searching for a coin at the bottom of a murky lake while blindfolded. The search teams were looking in roughly the right region, but roughly right doesn't find wreckage. Godfrey believed there was another data source everyone had missed, a technology called WSPR, pronounced Whisper. It stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, a global network of amateur ham radio stations that continuously transmit and receive low-power signals, tracking how radio waves bounce around the planet through the ionosphere. WSPR was designed for ham radio enthusiasts testing long-distance propagation. Nobody ever imagined using it to track aircraft. The signals are incredibly weak. The disturbances caused by a plane passing through a radio beam are almost imperceptible, buried in noise. Radio engineers dismissed the idea as impossible. Atmospheric scientists said the variables were too chaotic. Everyone agreed. WSPR couldn't locate MH370. But here's the catch. Godfrey understood something the skeptics didn't. When an aircraft passes through a radio signal's path, it creates a tiny anomaly in signal strength and timing. One anomaly means nothing, noise, static. But thousands of anomalies from hundreds of stations around the world, analyzed with the right mathematical algorithms. You could potentially track a plane's path across open ocean even if it wasn't transmitting any signals at all. The key was building algorithms sophisticated enough to separate aircraft signatures from atmospheric interference. Godfrey created mathematical models to identify the unique pattern an aircraft leaves in WSPR data. He tested them against commercial flights with known paths. He refined the parameters obsessively. The discovery. What Godfrey found made his blood run cold. Starting at precisely 1825 UTC, the exact moment of MH370's last radar contact, his analysis revealed consistent signal disturbances tracking south over the Indian Ocean. Not random noise, not atmospheric effects, a clear, unmistakable pattern matching an aircraft traveling at approximately 500 miles per hour at cruising altitude. The disturbances continued for 6 straight hours. They traced a path that started west of Malaysia, curved steadily south, and extended deep into the remote Indian Ocean. The movement was consistent, deliberate, the flight profile of an aircraft on autopilot, holding course through empty sky over empty water. Then, at 0019 UTC on March 9th, exactly when the aircraft's satellite system sent its final automated ping, the disturbances stopped dead. Suddenly, completely, at specific coordinates in the ocean. Godfrey ran the analysis again and again. He checked every data point. He had independent experts review his methodology and his mathematics. The results never changed. MH370 went down at 33.177 degrees south latitude, 95.30 degrees east longitude. Roughly 4,000 meters below the surface, about 1,200 miles west of Perth, Australia. But here is the catch. This location was outside the official search area. Not by a massive distance, roughly 100 kilometers west of where governments had spent years looking, but far enough that no one had ever scanned that patch of ocean floor. The most expensive search operation in aviation history, the operation that burned through hundreds of millions of dollars and deployed the world's most advanced underwater technology, had been looking in the wrong place. Godfrey wasn't satisfied with just radio data. He wanted physical proof, and he found it. Over the years, debris from MH370 had washed up on shores across the Indian Ocean. Wing fragments on Reunion Island, interior panels in Mozambique, landing gear components in Madagascar, all forensically confirmed to be from the missing Boeing 777. Using detailed ocean current data, Godfrey performed drift analysis on every recovered piece. He worked backward mathematically, calculating where each fragment must have entered the water to eventually reach where it was found. The result? Every single piece of debris was consistent with his proposed crash coordinates. The drift patterns aligned perfectly. The timing worked exactly. Independent oceanographers verified his models. Multiple independent data sources, WSPR radio tracking, debris drift analysis, satellite ping timing, all converged on the same location. 3 completely separate methodologies pointing to the same spot in the ocean. But Godfrey's analysis revealed something even more disturbing than the crash location. It revealed what happened on that aircraft during its final hours. The deliberate path. The flight path Godfrey reconstructed didn't show an aircraft drifting aimlessly after some catastrophic failure. It showed deliberate control, intentional navigation, course corrections, altitude adjustments. Someone flew that plane actively, skillfully, until the very end. This wasn't a ghost flight. That's the scenario where crew incapacitation leaves a plane on autopilot, flying blindly until fuel runs out and it drops from the sky. Ghost flights crash wherever the fuel exhaustion takes them. MH370 didn't. Someone turned that aircraft around. Someone disabled the tracking systems. Someone avoided Indonesian radar coverage along the coast. Someone navigated specific headings into one of the most isolated locations on Earth, far from any landmass, far from shipping lanes, far from anywhere the wreckage might be easily found. Even more chilling, Godfrey's analysis showed the plane entering a 20-minute holding pattern over the ocean, 3 hours into its final journey. A holding pattern. Why would someone trying to disappear stop and circle? Was the pilot communicating with authorities, checking if military aircraft were following, or simply deciding what to do next, hovering between turning back and committing to the final act? And when the fuel finally ran low, whoever was flying that aircraft didn't let it fall. They glided it, extended the range beyond what fuel exhaustion calculations predicted, put it down far beyond where search teams were looking, in a controlled descent that left the wreckage concentrated in a small area rather than scattered across miles of ocean. That's why the official searches failed. They calculated search areas based on an uncontrolled crash after fuel exhaustion. But MH370 wasn't uncontrolled. It was flown deliberately to a location beyond those calculations, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and wanted the aircraft to vanish. In December 2021, Godfrey published everything: exact coordinates, complete methodology, full data sets, an open invitation for anyone to verify or disprove his findings. He was certain. The evidence pointed to a specific, searchable location, and the flight data showed this was no accident. The families of victims finally had something concrete. Grace Nathan was 26 years old and studying law in Britain when her mother, Ann Daisy, boarded MH370. She caught the first flight home when she heard the news, spending 14 hours in agony, hoping for updates that never came. In the decades since, Grace has never spoken about her mother in past tense. "I still refer to my mother in the present tense," she told reporters. "I never refer to her as gone, passed away, or anything like that. I am never able to describe her in a manner which means that she is no longer with us." Grace topped her law class, became a successful lawyer in Kuala Lumpur, married, had children, all while waiting for answers that governments kept promising but never delivered. "Every year that goes by that the plane is not found," she said, is only just another agonizing year in wait. When Grace heard about Godfrey's findings, she became one of his strongest advocates. Here was someone with real credentials, official recognition, providing actual coordinates backed by mathematics, not theories or speculation. A searchable location that could finally end the nightmare. The families lobbied governments. They wrote letters. They gave interviews. They pleaded for one more search at the location Godfrey identified. Just one targeted expedition to verify or disprove his analysis. The response? Silence. The refusal. In 2023, a private company stepped forward with an offer that should have ended the debate. Ocean Infinity, specialists in deep-sea search operations with experience finding impossible wrecks, proposed scanning Godfrey's coordinates using advanced autonomous underwater vehicles. The cost? Under $50 million. The timeline? 3 months. They'd already searched for MH370 once before, and were willing to try again. All they needed was government authorization to enter the search area. But here's the catch. Malaysia, which holds jurisdiction over the investigation, denied the request. Official reason: insufficient evidence to justify another search. Let that sink in. A credible, expert, officially recognized by the Australian Safety Bureau, provides exact coordinates. Multiple independent data sources converge on the same location. Debris drift analysis matches perfectly. A private company offers to fund most of the operation. 3 months of work to end a decade of mystery. And the answer is no. Godfrey responded by releasing even more analysis. He showed that every alternative crash theory had been contradicted by debris evidence while his coordinates remained consistent with all physical findings. He demonstrated that WSPR tracking had successfully traced other flights with known paths, proving the methodology worked. He provided testimonials from aerospace engineers, oceanographers, and data scientists who verified his approach. Still no search. The official excuses kept cycling. Too expensive. Methods too novel. Previous search area was thorough enough. Need more compelling evidence before committing resources. But the families noticed something that didn't add up. Governments had already burned through hundreds of millions of dollars searching the wrong location. Verifying Godfrey's coordinates would cost a fraction of what they'd already wasted. If his analysis was wrong, proving it would take weeks. If he was right, hundreds of families would finally have closure, and the aviation industry would finally understand how a Boeing 777 disappeared. So why the resistance? Why the silence? Why refuse to even try? Godfrey developed his own theory, and it's deeply disturbing. What they don't want found, Richard Godfrey believes authorities don't want MH370 found. Not because they don't care about grieving families, because finding it would force them to answer questions they've worked very hard to bury. If the aircraft is discovered at Godfrey's coordinates, it immediately proves the official search was looking in the wrong place. It raises devastating questions about how billion-dollar operations, led by the world's most advanced nations, got the location completely wrong. But the deeper problem is what recovery teams would find down there. Modern deep-sea recovery technology can retrieve objects from 4,000 meters. The flight data recorders, the black boxes that every commercial aircraft carries, could still be intact after a decade on the ocean floor. Those black boxes would reveal exactly what happened in that cockpit. Every control input, every system status, every communication. Who was at the controls when the plane turned around? Whether there was a struggle, whether there were transmissions to anyone on the ground. Godfrey found evidence suggesting the pilot entered a holding pattern mid-flight, possibly to communicate with Malaysian authorities, 3 hours after the aircraft supposedly vanished from contact. If that communication happened, and if any government knew more than they've admitted for 10 years, those black boxes would expose everything. In interviews, Godfrey has been blunt about what he expects investigators will find. When MH370 is eventually discovered, and it will be discovered eventually, it will show controlled flight all the way to impact. It will show the aircraft was flown deliberately to this remote location. It will raise very serious questions about who knew what and when they knew it. That is what they are afraid of. Those aren't the words of a conspiracy theorist spinning wild tales. Those are the words of an engineer who did the math, verified his findings against multiple independent data sources, received official acknowledgement from government safety agencies, and now watches those same governments refuse to prove him right or wrong. The coordinates are waiting. Richard Godfrey is now 74 years old. He spent 7 years of his retirement on this case, unpaid, unrecognized, fighting skepticism and institutional resistance at every turn. He continues because of people like Grace Nathan, who still can't bring herself to speak about her mother in past tense. Because of Jaquita Gonzalez, who spent years as the public face of families seeking answers, lobbying governments, and giving interviews, before passing away in April 2025 without ever learning where her husband Patrick's body rests. Because 239 families deserve to know where their loved ones are. The technology exists. The coordinates are published. A private company has offered to conduct the search. The debris evidence aligns perfectly. The methodology has been verified by independent experts. Everything needed to solve this mystery is ready. The only thing missing is permission that governments refuse to give. If this story made you question what governments might be hiding, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started, somewhere at 33.177 degrees south, 95.30 degrees east, 4,000 meters beneath the Indian Ocean. The wreckage of Malaysia Airlines, Flight 370, sits in total darkness. 239 people. Answers to every question. Proof of everything that happened. All of it waiting on the ocean floor. Richard Godfrey gave the world exact coordinates. He showed every calculation. He invited anyone to verify his work or prove him wrong. Nobody has, and nobody will even look. The question isn't whether Richard Godfrey found MH370. The question is what's recorded on those black boxes that terrifies governments more than a decade of unanswered questions ever could.